Hello, thank you for finding your way to this video about peer review of teaching at James Cook University. My name is Kay Martinez. I'm the Associate Dean of Teaching and Learning in the Faculty of Arts, Education and Social Sciences. During the course of 2011, the ADTLs, the Associate Deans, together with the Director of Teaching and Learning Development and the Senior DVCA, got together and we came up with a suite of new policies that will come into effect in January of 2012. One of these is the really important one around learning, teaching and assessment that really affects every aspect of our teaching and learning. The other one is this peer review of teaching. And this is quite a radical move that we're making. So I'm hoping that if you've got to this website from the JCU homepage and then to Teaching and Learning, that you will have also downloaded this little booklet, or even better, you may have attended one of the workshops that we've run to help get you started. So what I'll do in this video is just quickly go through what I think are some of the really key features for you to be aware of. If you have problems or concerns, or if you want inquiries about whether you're on the right track, make sure you have a conversation with the Associate Dean of Teaching and Learning in your faculty, or ring up the good folk over at Teaching and Learning Development under the Director of Angela Hill. There's quite a lot of people there now who can help you, and the librarians are great sources of information as well. Okay, let's get to the job. The peer review of teaching at James Cook University. Now, probably the most important thing you'll need to know is that this is mandatory for all teaching staff, all full-time teaching staff, from the 1st of January next year. We'll get closer to the actual detail of the policy in a little while. But I want you to notice, first of all, that this peer review of teaching, the particular model of this that we're introducing, has got two key features. One is that it's collaborative. This is about us as academics here at James Cook working with each other wherever we are to improve the quality of teaching, and more importantly really is to improve student success. So this notion of it being collaborative and focused on student success should be the two pillars that you think of all the time when you think of peer review of teaching. The shorthand for peer review of teaching is PROT. So if I refer to that, you'll understand what I mean. So it's important that this is a James Cook University policy. This does affect all of us at all of the different campuses and all of the different sites where JCU is now located. And of course it's in keeping with the general rhetoric, the general vision, the general statement of who we are as a university. So along with our major intent of a brighter future for life in the tropics worldwide, you'll note that we say frequently that our key responsibility is to our students. And so even though this is a peer review of teaching, the focus is still on student success as the end game. And again, I mentioned this new learning, teaching and assessment policy that's starting to take effect in 2012. And I think what we're doing around PROT, peer review of teaching, connects very strongly with 6 of the 9 principles, probably most notably that final principle that's up there, CP9, teaching that develops learning, is well organised and enhancement-led through the cyclical process of reflection, revision and improvement. And that's really what peer review of teaching is all about. So you can see we're trying to line up the ducks here, as it were, trying to have us all moving in this same direction. So why do peer review of teaching? Why do we want to add an extra layer of work to us when we're already busy? Well, I think the major reason is that it's a very rich source of feedback to help us improve our teaching. I've been struck since I moved into this general area of higher education how dependent we've been on student feedback about teaching as really the only source of information about how well we're going. And whilst that remains a very important part of what we do, it's critical that we listen to our students, that we hear what they're saying about how well they're learning. It's also important, I think, to recognise that there are some aspects of our teaching that students are not well placed to talk to us about. So they're not well placed to tell us if we're at the edge of the curriculum of our field. They're not well placed to tell us if this is an appropriate sequence of things. Is this the right level for year level 2, for example? So it's to those sorts of things that we need to turn to our colleagues, to our peers, to get that added dimension of feedback. Student feedback will always be important. They, after all, are the proof of the pudding, if you like, and if it's not working for them, it's not working. But our colleagues can give us additional and different information about our teaching. And I think a second major issue is that teaching is one of those curious things. It's at the one time public. There are always other people involved, that is the students, but it's often very private. For many of us, very few people have seen what we actually do with our students when we're in lectures, when we're in tutorials, when we're in labs with them, or even when we write comments on their feedback, when we reply to them on the discussion board, or when we send emails. It's very private between the teacher and the student. And peer review of teaching is a way to deprivatise it, to put teaching into more of a public domain where it's open for scrutiny and critique and feedback in the way that we're very familiar with around our research, for example. And I think the third thing that's underpinned this for me in approaching the sort of model that we'd use for peer review of teaching is that I think teaching at James Cook University means that we have this expertise that we share. There is something particular about teaching here. There is something particular, and I find really exciting, about the incredible diversity of students who come to James Cook University and for whom their experience here really does make a difference in their lives. And I know that sounds cliched and trite, but it has been my experience of teaching here for almost 3 decades that there is an element of that here about teaching at James Cook University. And the wonderful thing is that rather than us thinking of a model where we would need to go to some gurus around teaching and learning, some experts, the model that we're proposing here is that we recognise each other's shared expertise, that this is the area that we know well, this is what we do, this is our work. Number 4 on this list, I've already mentioned that as part of the enterprise bargaining agreement, peer review of teaching will be mandatory from 1st of January 2012. It will also now be used as part of the promotion process. So those of you who may have applied for promotion recently will know that up until now you've had to submit the actual peer reviews, 2 of them, by other people, written, the full written form of the review. If you check now, and from now on when you apply for promotion, you won't be required to submit the actual review. What we're looking at here is that core principle 9 about a cycle of improvement and reflection. So what you'll be required to do is to comment on what you've done with the peer review, how you've used peer review to inform your own teaching, to try and improve what you do, always with this ultimate focus of improving student success. Okay, so we decide we're going to make this mandatory for everybody. How on earth could we check this when we have hundreds and hundreds of full-time academic staff here at James Cook University? So the way of making sure it's happening is through the PMP process. So this will now be a tick box on your annual PMP that you will check that you have engaged in peer review. And what we've tried to do is use the same sort of approach, the same sort of criteria, the same approach to teaching and learning really, so that what you do with peer review, and we expect it may take between 4 and 8 hours is probably the estimate that we're making around this, that you invest that time and not only will it hopefully have the impact of improving your teaching and student learning, but you'll be able to use it for other things. You'll be able to use it for your promotion, as I've mentioned, and for your applying for teaching award, teaching citation applications. And for some of you who do publish about your teaching, this peer review of teaching, you can see this as another source of evidence, another form of data, if you like, to inform those publications. And this is really about teaching becoming more scholarly, about putting it up for critique, as I said, in exactly the same way that we do with our research. And just as we submit our papers off to a journal and get peer review on them, it's up to us to then decide what we do with that peer review, whether we accept it, whether we modify what we've done according to that, or whether we take our own principled stand about what we're going to do with the review that we get. I just wanted, before we get into the nuts and bolts of this, I just wanted to indicate to you, I wanted to come back to the work of Stephen Brookfield that really has been seminal in the field of the critically reflective practitioner, the teacher. And I think his comments about there being 4 useful lenses through which to view our teaching are very helpful here. The first, we bring ourselves to teaching and learning. We should bring our own values, our own personal philosophies and principles of practice. So you need to think carefully about what you think is really important in your teaching, in your discipline, in your context, at the level that you're teaching, be it undergraduate, postgraduate, diploma student or whatever. So your values, your experience, your sense of the discipline, your expertise, you must bring to this as well. Our students' eyes, we capture this fairly well here at James Cook University with student feedback about subjects and about teaching. And watch that space, because there's going to be a new policy coming out on that shortly that's likely to combine those two. And of course, there is some national process around collecting student feedback as well, and that's in the course experience questionnaire data that hopefully you're getting to have a look at as well. The third lens is this one that we're focusing on for PROT, which is our colleagues' experience, so we call on them. And finally, not to dismiss this one because it's important, it's the growing literature around what constitutes good teaching and learning, good teaching in the higher ed context. And there's some generic work around this, but there's also a growing number of discipline-specific journals that I hope lots of you are aware of. And again, your Associate Dean Teaching and Learning and the good folk over in TLD will be the ones who can direct you there as well. All right, let's get down to the definition of peer review of teaching that we're using here at James Cook University. It's in the booklet that you hopefully will have downloaded, and it's on the screen at the moment. And you can see a reference at the bottom, a URL link of that screen. If you want to have a look at that, I really would recommend it. It's a terrific resource that was developed from the Centre for the Study of Higher Education at the University of Melbourne as part of a national ALTC project that was conducted from 2008 to 2009, that I was really fortunate enough to become involved with. And it looked at peer review of teaching across Australian universities. So what we're doing here is in keeping with where the national sector is going around this. And that's the definition that we've adopted. It's a fairly simplistic one, and you'll note at the end of it again, it says it's the expertise and experience of those in a position to understand in a particular context. So your colleagues here at James Cook University should be seen as experts who share this knowledge with you. So to sum up, our position here at James Cook University about PROT is that our focus is on us as academics using students' and peers' feedback on teaching to improve our teaching and our students' learning and documenting the process. And in some ways, it's that documenting that's the only new bit for many of you in peer review of teaching. The little comment at the bottom of the screen there says we've been doing this for years. And it's been an interesting phenomenon for me as I've been working with groups of staff around the university talking about this new policy. Lots of them have said to me, oh, we've always done this. We've been doing this for years, whether it's at examiners' meetings or in the coffee room or at the printer. We've always shared what we're doing. But this is now systematising it, formalising it a little and documenting it. So we're capturing good practice, I guess, is one way to look at it. Now, there are 5 particular policy points that we're introducing. They are set out in detail on the web and in the booklet. Perhaps the one I need to just spend a second exploring is the first one that says that during the course of the year, it's compulsory for you to engage either as the reviewer or the reviewee. But what we would like you to make sure is that at least every couple of years you have someone in to review your own teaching. Don't always be the reviewer. And I should also mention that you learn a huge amount from being the reviewer as well as being reviewed. It's really quite refreshing to have a look at someone else's teaching in this way. I think the rest of this I've covered briefly, but those policy points, I hope, are very clear for you. It's important to underscore the ethical issues here about who owns peer review of teaching. And the ownership of the process really lies with you, with the person who is being reviewed. You own it. You decide what will be reviewed, who will be your reviewer, and what you do with the product of it. So this is really important that we're clear around the confidentiality and around the professional ethics of this. So we have a professional conduct code, and this is just part of that. This is respectful, collegial relationships that we're dealing with here. But the ownership is with the person who's being reviewed. Practicals now. What aspect of your teaching do you want feedback? I think what's really important here is to dispel the myth that peer review of teaching has to be about someone coming in and watching you teaching live. Those moments when you're with the students face to face. You know, we all know that teaching is so much more than that. It's all the work you do behind the scenes, thinking through, composing your subject, preparing the materials, putting together, selecting the best resources, and of course increasingly a huge amount of time that we engage with our students using learning technologies. So please broaden your concept of what it is that you're going to have reviewed, and please keep it manageable. Don't say I want the whole subject reviewed. That's a massive job. Choose a particular aspect of it, and it might be that you're still worried about that the students are not being engaged in the tutorial. Well, then you might need someone to come and have a look at the tutorials with you. It might be that you're not sure that you are getting the students properly involved with the discussion forum on Learn JCU. Then what you'll need to do is give your reviewer access to your Learn JCU site and get them to engage with it. So you decide what aspect of your teaching you really want to focus on and improve, or that you want to get some affirmation about because it's experimental for you. And just think broadly about this. Think of how varied teaching can be. So then you need to make the decision as who should be a peer, who constitutes a peer. So I've been stressing to you that it's your colleagues here at James Cook University because they share the experience of teaching here. Think now about whether you want it to be in the same discipline. Now, if you're wanting to make sure that what you're doing in your third year engineering class is at the cutting edge of the field, then you clearly will need to have somebody else from engineering who can talk to you about it. But if you're wanting to get feedback on the ways you're using technology, for example, then it may be even more helpful to have somebody from another discipline have a look because they won't get caught up in the content. So think carefully about who constitutes a peer. And I've already seen some wonderful examples of people here at James Cook University using people from industry or from professions to give them feedback, particularly for final year subjects, to give them feedback on the nature of the materials that they're providing and on the sorts of assessment tasks that they're asking students to do. So please think a little broadly about this. And what we're looking for here is genuine feedback as a critical colleague, not just I scratch your back and you scratch mine. So think carefully about who can do it. And the other sorts of terrifically innovative examples I think that I've seen is people using colleagues at other universities to do some benchmarking for them. So they might send them their subject outline or again give them access to a Learn JCU site. And often this will happen reciprocally so everybody wins. And of course, again, what information you give them, I've already talked about this a little, it will depend on what it is that you're asking them to review. But please think more widely than having to have somebody come into your classroom with you. And don't forget that every time you video conference, you've got the capacity to capture that as well. And you can use those recordings. And next year, Learn JCU will have some wonderful extra capacities for capturing teaching episodes as well. So you'll be able to capture them, edit them down, and use various selected bits for somebody to do to keep this task much more manageable. And in case you're having trouble still thinking, what on earth am I going to do here? What will I have reviewed? In the little booklet, we've made some suggestions of frameworks that you might go to have a look at that might give you some ideas about what you'd like to have reviewed. So I would recommend that you have a look in the booklet. I've already mentioned the new Learning, Teaching and Assessment Policy. One of those principles is about the diversity of students, as is one of the criteria for the ALTC citations. So you might, for example, have a group of non-English speaking students who've entered your class for the first time, and you're not sure if you are properly engaging them and meeting their needs for their students, for their success as students. So that might be a good thing for you to review and get somebody who you know to be really successful in that field to come and have a look at it for you. So that's in keeping with those policy directions as well. Now, if you do decide that it's the interactive bit you'd like some feedback on, I've popped into the little booklet that's there a couple of suggestions for protocols that you might follow around that. Things like letting the students know who this strange person is who's sitting at the back of the tute or whatever it might be. And I've mentioned several times that there are lots of people around who can help you with this as well. Just before I finish off, I wanted to say just a few sticking points. Try not to do too much in one go. I've already said try and keep this manageable for both you and for the reviewer. And so taking it in bite-sized pieces so you can do something with it. This year you might want to have a look at what you're doing with your first years. Or it might be your postgrads. You might have a block mode that you're teaching and it's never quite clicked. So you might choose to get someone to have a look at the program for the week. And then you think, well, okay, that seems to be in order. Next year, I'll have a go at something else. Or next year, you might approach somebody and ask if you could review them on the same thing so you get another look at. Occasionally, what I've seen people get concerned about is very different teaching styles, very different personality styles, where one person's the extrovert, the other one tends to be very low-key, low energy. There is no one right way to teach. That's the great thing, and it's also that, there's no silver bullet to any of this. What I've found works a real treat to diffuse any temptation to get this into a competition about preferred teaching style or that top-down expert judging is to redirect the focus to the student learning. To have a look at it and say, well, I noticed that when you shifted from this to this, the students seem to really get engaged again. So if the conversation turns to the improvement or the response to student learning, then that's what will do it. Or if you can say the students seem to really respond better to Learn JCU discussion forums when they have very clear roles as to what they're to do. That's the focus. So it's not about, I think you should do this. The conversation will be, the students seem to. This seems to be more effective. So that removes it from the personal a little bit, okay? What to do with it when you get this peer review in, somebody's given you some peer review, you should put it alongside all the other pieces of the jigsaw puzzle to give you a bit of a fuller picture about feedback on what you're doing, and then make that considered judgment. You're the professional, you're in charge here of your own teaching, decide what you're going to do with it, and then do it. Jump in and do some action. And have the conversation with your students about what you're doing too, how you've responded to feedback from previous students in your subject and from colleagues. It shares, it lends then to that co-construction of teaching and learning. And finally, just to finish off, some mythbusters. So I hope from this brief talk and from the materials that are there, you now are really clear about this. The prop that we're talking about here is not about sitting in on a friend's lecture and telling them they're great. Maybe you will do that, but it should always be through a critical lens, and it should be that the person has directed you what you are to look at, has given you the sort of information and materials and teaching artefacts that you might need to be able to offer some sort of feedback. Secondly, this isn't about another form of surveillance and management and measurement and performativity. You may choose to use it in that way if you want to, but you stay in charge of what's done here and how you use it. So that, I think that's really important. And the focus is around, the whole point of this is about deprivatising teaching and about improving student success here at James Cook. And the third myth that I hope I've really diffused, we're not looking for experts coming in, judging and giving advice. We're talking about colleagues sharing practice, exchanging good ideas, moving from shared experience and trust and respect for one another. And finally, I truly hope you don't see this as another huge burden on your time. There have been some great people in different disciplines across the uni who've already trialled this, and as I said, they're saying it's between 4 to 8 hours for both reviewer and reviewee. So expect that, and you're only asked to be one or the other each year, so expect that that's about the time commitment, which seems to me to be a very reasonable investment if the outcome of all this is going to be that your teaching is improved, you're more stimulated about what you're doing, more confident that what you're doing is in keeping with the field, and if our students at James Cook University are staying and achieving more success and emerging as great graduates. So thank you for listening. Lots of information on the web and lots of information available from each other, from your colleagues, from your associate deans and from TLD. Thanks very much.